This video lecture is going to deal with the Gettysburg Address, specifically focusing on it as a primary source. So now's the time for the bad joke of the Gettysburg Address. We will be talking about the address of the Gettysburg Address. It occurred after the battle in Gettysburg, Pennsylvania. You'll see it on the upper right-hand corner of the map there, in Pennsylvania. The battle itself was enormous. It was fought right around the 4th of July, 1863. It was just absurdly huge and bloody, and it just blew everyone's mind in a way that nothing else had before. Lincoln himself was very much moved. I don't need to go into too much detail, but he had a lot of personal stuff going on right around that time. I think it would be fair to say that in a lot of ways the nation had a lot going on at this time. This is the first photographed war, and it's also right around the time that Americans' philosophical ideas about death had been changing tremendously, and something on the scale of Gettysburg was really tough to deal with. Lincoln was invited to give a speech dedicating the graveyard at the site of the Battle of Gettysburg. He was not the only speaker, but the speech he did make had quite an impact, and it's his most famous speech today. But now, a song.
77 years ago, our fathers brought forth on this continent a new nation, conceived in liberty and dedicated to the proposition that all men are created equal. Now we are engaged in a great civil war, testing whether that nation, or any nation so conceived and so dedicated, can long endure. We are met on a great battlefield of that war. We have come to dedicate a portion of that field as a final resting place for those who here gave their lives that this nation might live. It is altogether fitting and proper that we should do this. But in a larger sense, we cannot dedicate, we cannot consecrate, we cannot hallow this ground. These brave men, living and dead, who struggled here have consecrated it, far above our poor power to add or detract. The world will little note nor long remember what we say here, but it can never forget what they did here. For it is us, the living rather, to be dedicated here to the unfinished work for which they have fought, and have thus far so nobly advanced. It is rather for us to be here dedicated to the great task remaining before us. Okay, yes, I am reading the Gettysburg Address to the karaoke track for Rocket Man, but I feel like it adds a little something, just bear with me. That from these honored dead we shall take increased devotion to that cause for which they gave the last full measure of devotion. That we here highly resolve that these dead shall not have died in vain, that this nation under God shall have a new birth of freedom, and that the government of the people, by the people, for the people, shall not perish from the earth.
Well, thank you for bearing with me there. I hope you appreciate the musical interlude. But now we want to really think about what you just heard in the text of the Gettysburg Address. We want to think about soapstone when you look at a primary source, right? Think about the speaker, in this case Lincoln. We know a fair amount about Lincoln as a politician and as a man. You want to think about the occasion, the dedication of the burial ground at Gettysburg and the battle site. We want to think about the audience, the people who are there to see Lincoln, the people who are there because of the event. The press is there. Citizens, mainly from the Pennsylvania area, are there because that's where the battle is. So thinking about the Union, the purpose, certainly he was invited there to talk about something specific. Also, there's the war going on. You cannot forget that the occasion is the war. You also want to think about the tone of this, and that does play a large role in it, and hopefully the musical interlude helped you, focus on the tone a little bit and the solemnity of what's going on. Just a little academic exercise. Take a look back at the text, and if you want to pull up a bigger copy or a searchable copy online, pause it and give yourself some time to do it. But check out how many times he says union in this speech. Pause it. Yeah, how many times did he say union? Not once. He doesn't say union. He doesn't say Confederate. This is a very deliberate political move. Think about it. He's dedicated to the Union. That's why this war is happening. You know, not to drive the Confederates away, to keep them in the United States and keep it together. He's so dedicated, he doesn't even point out the difference between North and South. He makes it one nation. The use of the term nation rather than union, which had been, had become divisive at this point, is a very deliberate choice he's making, and you want to think about that. Also think about the founding documents that he's referencing. Take a moment, look at that text, pause it, see what you see. See if you see what I see. Are you checking it out? We got references in the very beginning, bringing it all the way back to 1776, 7 years ago. 20 years is a score, so do a little math. Going back to 1776, Declaration of Independence. He wraps it up with a reference to the Founding Fathers as well, right? Government of the people, by the people, for the people, deliberately referencing the Constitution. You want to think about what the nation is based on, the values it's dedicated to, talking about equality, talking about a nation under God. These are all things that are going to play well with the audience, that show what he stands for, and is sort of looking at what everybody has in common rather than what is divisive. He does not mention the fact that there are enemies buried together here, right? They bury the dead, both the Confederates and the Union people, just on the battlefield, not exactly where they fall, but in a somewhat organized fashion. But you've got Confederate people being buried on Union soil. It doesn't matter. They're Americans, and he refers to them as members of one nation. You know, the brave dead, not separating an enemy out of it. That's a very deliberate choice as well. He wants to be a unifier in this case rather than being divisive. Certainly the fact of the occasion does play into it. He wants to be solemn. You certainly don't want to say anything, too edgy at a ceremony like this. It's not exactly a funeral, but it's pretty darn close. Although this is, definitely remembered for the solemnity of the occasion, the power of the words, the way he really pulls out the unfinished work that they have nobly advanced, the great task. He really does make it about the war in a way that doesn't come off as really deliberately trashy and political and pushing an agenda. Really, the last paragraph is a big thing that you'd want to focus on. Think about what he's saying about the important thing that the world will remember, talking about the survival of the nation, really highlighting the sacrifice that the soldiers from both sides made, and really selling the idea to the audience that they died. Feel bad. They died for the country, to keep it together, and for those principles that the nation stands for. And absolutely, I don't think we have any doubt from Lincoln's public and private writing that he was absolutely dedicated to not seeing the United States fall apart. The war won't come to an end for a couple more years, but this is sort of a moral and an emotional turning point. Certainly the battle was a turning point in that it was just tremendously huge and tremendously bloody and tremendously tragic for everybody. After that, the Confederates are more or less on the defensive, and they're going to be working backwards until they do get crushed by Union forces, and ultimately the United States does stick together as a nation, and that is, it's more or less, what Lincoln wanted, that this nation shall not perish from the earth. And in conclusion, I would just like to wrap it up with this painting of the Gettysburg Address, which to me looks like Lincoln is saying, "Hey, come at me, bro!" A nice solemn moment to conclude this solemn lecture.